The thundering sound of rain against the tin roof was deafening, but it couldn't drown out the roar of the swollen river that threatened to consume everything Levi Ingram had worked for. Colorado Territory, 1872, a year that had begun with promise for his ranch outside the small town of Shafter, nestled in the foothills where the plains met the mountains. Now, as the skies unleashed their fury for the fourth straight day, Levi stood on his porch watching helplessly as the waters inched closer to his home. "Damn this rain to hell," he muttered, running a calloused hand through his dark hair, now damp from the mist that blew sideways under the porch overhang. At 32, Levi had weathered droughts, blizzards, and the occasional band of rustlers, but nothing like this deluge that threatened to wash away everything he'd built over the past decade. His faithful cattle dog, Rusty, pressed against his leg, whining softly as another crash of thunder shook the sky. The livestock had been moved to higher ground 2 days ago, but Levi couldn't help wondering if even the ridge would remain above water if the rain continued. "I know, boy," he said, patting the dog's head. "We've seen bad before, but this—" His words trailed off as he squinted through the curtain of rain at something moving along the flooded road that led to his property. At first he thought it might be debris carried by the current, but the movement was too deliberate. A horse, he realized with a start, struggling against the rushing water and atop it. A rider, Christ almighty, Levi swore, grabbing his oilskin coat and hat. "Stay, Rusty," he commanded, and plunged into the downpour. The cold rain immediately soaked through his clothing as he splashed through ankle-deep water across his yard. The rider was closer now, and Levi could see it was a woman, her dark hair plastered to her face, desperately trying to control her panicked horse as the water surged around its legs. "Hey," Levi shouted over the storm. "This way, follow my voice." The woman's head snapped up, and for a moment their eyes met across the churning water. She nodded once and pulled on the reins, guiding the terrified animal toward him. Levi waded deeper, the water now at his knees, powerful current tugging at his legs. "That's it, keep coming," he encouraged, reaching out his hand as they drew closer. Just as her horse reached more solid ground, a flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The horse reared in terror, throwing the woman from the saddle into the muddy water. Levi lunged forward, catching her around the waist before the current could sweep her away. "I've got you," he said, pulling her against him as she coughed and sputtered. Her horse bolted, disappearing into the rain. "My horse," she gasped, struggling to stand. "Forget the horse," Levi said firmly. "We need to get out of this water." Without waiting for her response, he swept her into his arms and carried her toward the house, fighting against the strengthening current with each step. By the time they reached the porch, they were both shivering. Rusty barked excitedly, dancing around them as Levi shouldered open the door and carried the woman inside. "Put me down," she demanded, her teeth chattering. "I can walk." Levi set her on her feet but kept a steadying hand on her arm. "Name's Levi Ingram. This is my ranch you've stumbled onto." The woman pushed wet hair from her face, revealing striking green eyes that assessed him quickly. "Naomi Fairchild," she replied, wrapping her arms around herself. "I was trying to reach Shafter before the storm got worse, but the bridge was out and I thought I could find higher ground." She glanced around the simple but comfortable ranch house. "I apologize for the intrusion, Mr. Ingram." "No intrusion when the alternative is drowning," Levi said, moving to stoke the fire in the stone hearth. "And it's just Levi. You're a long way from town, Miss Fairchild." "Naomi," she corrected. "And yes, I realize that now." She looked down at her sodden dress, water pooling around her feet on the wooden floor. "You need dry clothes," Levi said, heading toward his bedroom. I'll find something for you to wear. It won't fit right, but it'll be warm." He returned with a flannel shirt and a pair of trousers with suspenders. "These are the smallest I have," he explained, handing them to her. "There's a screen in the corner where you can change. I'll make some coffee." While Naomi changed, Levi busied himself at the cast iron stove, occasionally stealing glances at her silhouette behind the screen. There was something about her that intrigued him, a certain determination in her bearing that suggested she wasn't the typical Eastern lady who occasionally passed through these parts. "May I ask what brings you to Shafter?" he called over his shoulder, pouring steaming coffee into 2 tin cups. There was a pause before she answered. "I'm looking for work," she said simply, emerging from behind the screen. Levi turned, coffee forgotten, as he took in the sight of her in his clothes. The shirt was enormous on her slender frame, the sleeves rolled up several times to free her hands. The trousers were cinched tight at her waist with a piece of rope, the excess fabric bunched around her ankles. Her dark hair, beginning to dry, fell in waves past her shoulders. Despite the ill-fitting garments, there was a dignity in the way she carried herself that demanded respect. She wasn't conventionally beautiful, Levi thought, but striking with high cheekbones, those remarkable eyes, and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was set in a serious line now. "What kind of work?" he asked, handing her a cup of coffee. "Teaching," she replied, accepting the cup gratefully. "I heard Shafter was looking for a schoolteacher," Levi nodded. "They are. Old Mrs. Peterson passed last winter and the children have been running wild since." He gestured to a chair at the rough-hewn table. "Sit. You must be exhausted." Naomi sank into the chair, cradling the warm cup between her hands. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Levi," she corrected herself. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been watching the road." "Where are you from?" Levi asked, taking the seat across from her. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault, punctuated by occasional rumbles of thunder. "Boston, most recently," she replied. "But I've been traveling west for nearly 2 months." "Boston to Colorado is a long journey for a woman alone," Levi observed, studying her face. Something flickered in Naomi's eyes, caution, perhaps, or simply weariness. "I'm accustomed to managing on my own," she said. "Though I must admit, I underestimated the severity of your western storms." Levi laughed, a warm, rich sound that seemed to fill the small house. "This isn't typical, even for us. Folks around here are calling it the flood of the century." He glanced toward the window, where water streamed down the glass in sheets. "The river's already over its banks by at least 15 feet, and it's still rising. I moved my cattle up to higher ground, but if this keeps up—" He shook his head. "You think the water will reach the house?" Naomi asked, concern evident in her voice. "It's possible," Levi admitted. "This place has stood for 12 years without so much as a puddle in the root cellar, but I've never seen the purgatoire this angry." As if in response to his words, a loud crack sounded outside, followed by a heavy thud that shook the house. "What was that?" Naomi gasped, rising from her chair. "Stay here," Levi ordered, grabbing a lantern and heading for the door, Rusty at his heels. He returned minutes later, soaking wet again and grim-faced. "Cottonwood came down on the north side, missed the house, but took out part of the stable roof." He ran a hand through his dripping hair. "The water's risen another foot while we've been sitting here." Naomi stood, determination etched on her face. "What can I do to help?" Levi looked at her in surprise, then nodded. "We need to move essentials to the loft, just in case. Food, blankets, anything that shouldn't get wet." They worked side by side for the next hour, carrying supplies up the ladder to the small loft above the main room. Naomi moved with purpose, asking sensible questions and anticipating needs without being told. Levi found himself impressed by her practicality and strength. "You've done this before," he observed as she efficiently packed flour and coffee beans into a watertight tin. "Prepared for disaster." "More times than I care to remember," she replied without elaboration. By nightfall, the water had reached the first step of the porch. They ate a simple meal of beans and salt pork by lamplight, the constant drumming of rain on the roof making conversation difficult. Rusty lay at Levi's feet, occasionally lifting his head at particularly loud crashes of thunder. "You should take the bed," Levi said as they finished eating. "I'll sleep by the fire." Naomi shook her head. "I won't displace you from your bed, Mr. Ingram. The floor by the fire will be perfectly adequate for me." "Levi," he reminded her, "and I insist it wouldn't be right." Their argument was interrupted by a new sound, a groaning, creaking noise that seemed to come from the very foundation of the house. Levi was on his feet instantly. "Grab your boots," he commanded. "We need to check the root cellar." The cellar door was in the kitchen, and when Levi pulled it open, water immediately bubbled up through the opening. "It's coming up through the floor," he said grimly. "The foundation won't hold much longer if the pressure keeps building." "What do we do?" Naomi asked, her voice steady despite the fear evident in her eyes. Levi closed the cellar door, his mind racing. "We need something that floats," he said slowly, an idea forming. "The house might not stand, but we can build something that will ride out the flood." "An ark," Naomi said softly. "Like Noah." "Exactly," Levi nodded, already moving toward the door. "I've got lumber in the barn. If the water hasn't reached it yet, we might have a chance." "You can't go out in this," Naomi protested, grabbing his arm. Levi covered her hand with his own. "We don't have a choice. If that river crests overnight like I think it will, this whole valley could be underwater by morning." He squeezed her hand once. "I'll be careful." Before she could object further, he was gone, plunging into the darkness and rain. Naomi paced anxiously by the window, straining to catch glimpses of Levi in the sporadic flashes of lightning. Minutes stretched interminably until finally, she saw him struggling toward the house, dragging something behind him. She flung open the door as he staggered onto the porch, pulling a makeshift sled loaded with lumber and tools. "The barn's half flooded," he gasped, water streaming from his clothes. "But I got what we need." They worked through the night, Levi constructing what amounted to a large, flat-bottomed boat on the main floor of the house, while Naomi gathered supplies and helped hold boards in place as he hammered. The water continued to rise, seeping under the door and through cracks in the floorboards. By dawn, they were standing in ankle-deep water inside the house. "It's not pretty," Levi said, surveying their creation, "but it'll float." The craft was roughly 12 feet long and 6 feet wide, with high sides and a small shelter at one end made from salvaged barn doors. "How do we get it out?" Naomi asked, looking around at the intact walls of the house. Levi pointed to the large front window. "That's our door. When the water gets high enough, we'll break through and float out." Naomi stared at him. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," he confirmed, checking the knots on the ropes that secured their supplies. "The house is already shifting on its foundation. It won't be long now." As if on cue, the building groaned ominously, and they both felt the floor tilt slightly. "Rusty, come," Levi called, and the dog splashed over to him, whining nervously. "Good boy. You're coming too." By mid-morning, the water inside the house was knee-deep and rising rapidly. The walls creaked and popped as the pressure from outside increased. Levi and Naomi stood in the ark, watching the water climb higher. "I've been thinking," Levi said suddenly, turning to Naomi. "If we survive this, I could use help rebuilding. The school in town won't open until fall anyway." Naomi looked up at him in surprise. "Are you offering me employment, Mr. Ingram?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I suppose I am, Miss Fairchild." Before she could respond, a tremendous crack split the air, and the front wall of the house gave way in a rush of water and debris. The ark lurched violently, spinning in the current that suddenly filled the room. "Hold on," Levi shouted, grabbing Naomi around the waist with one arm while clinging to the side of their craft with the other. Rusty yelped in terror as water swirled around them. For heart-stopping moments, they were at the mercy of the flood, the remains of the house disintegrating around them. Then, miraculously, their vessel stabilized, bobbing on the surface of what had become a vast inland sea. Levi looked down at Naomi, still clasped tightly against him. Her face was pale but composed, her green eyes meeting his without flinching. "We made it," he said softly. She nodded, her arms still wrapped around his waist. "We did." Reluctantly, they released each other, and Levi used a plank to paddle them away from the wreckage of his home. All around them, the landscape was transformed: fences, outbuildings, and trees barely visible above the churning brown water. "My God," Naomi whispered, taking in the devastation. "The whole valley." "It'll recede," Levi said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. "Eventually." They spent that day and night adrift on the flood, taking turns sleeping in the small shelter while the other kept watch. Rusty huddled between them, occasionally growling at debris that bumped against their craft. The rain finally stopped late in the afternoon, giving way to an eerie stillness broken only by the soft lapping of water against wood. Under a star-filled sky, they shared the last of the bread Levi had managed to save. "Tell me about your ranch," Naomi said, drawing her knees to her chest. "What was it like before?" Levi gazed out over the dark water, remembering. "It wasn't much compared to some spreads. 200 acres, 50 head of cattle. A decent barn, corrals, the house you saw." He smiled faintly. "But it was mine, free and clear. Took me 8 years to pay it off." "You built it yourself?" "Every board," he confirmed. "Came out here in '60 before the war. Had nothing but a wagon and some tools my pa gave me." "Your family's back east?" Naomi asked. Levi shook his head. "Gone. Ma died when I was 14. Pa followed 3 years later." He glanced at her. "What about you? Family waiting for news in Boston?" Naomi looked away. "No, no family." Something in her tone told Levi not to press further. Instead, he asked, "Why teaching? And why come all the way to Colorado Territory to do it?" She was silent for so long he thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "I taught at a girls' school in Boston for 5 years. It was respectable work, but stifling." She met his eyes. "I wanted to go somewhere where what mattered was what I could do, not who my parents were or what social circles I moved in." Levi nodded slowly. "You found the right place for that. Out here, a person's judged by their actions, not their ancestors." A small smile curved Naomi's lips. "That's what I hoped." They fell silent, listening to the water lapping at their makeshift vessel. Above them, the stars wheeled slowly across the vast Colorado sky, a reminder of how small their troubles were in the grand scheme of things. Sometime in the night, Levi awoke to find Naomi shivering beside him. Without a word, he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close to share his warmth. She stiffened momentarily, then relaxed against him, her head finding a place on his shoulder. "Thank you," she murmured sleepily, "for saving my life yesterday." "Seems to me we saved each other," Levi replied softly, looking down at her dark head resting against him. When dawn broke, they found themselves drifting toward higher ground. Using improvised oars, they guided their craft toward a small rise where the tops of cottonwood trees were visible above the water. "Look," Naomi said suddenly, pointing. "Cattle!" Levi followed her gaze and felt a surge of hope. A dozen or more of his herd were gathered on the hillside, having found safety on the natural rise. "That's them," he confirmed, a smile breaking across his face. "Some of them made it. They managed to beach their ark on the muddy slope and climbed out on shaky legs after so many hours afloat." Rusty bounded ahead, barking joyfully at the familiar scent of the cattle. The animals regarded them warily but didn't flee. "Now what?" Naomi asked, surveying the landscape. Water stretched as far as they could see in 3 directions, with only the rising foothills to the west remaining dry. Levi shaded his eyes, looking westward. "We head for higher ground, wait for the water to recede, then assess the damage." He glanced at her. "That is, if you're staying." Naomi met his gaze steadily. "I have nowhere else to go. My things were on my horse and the horse is gone." She straightened her shoulders. "Besides, I believe you offered me employment, Mr. Ingram." A slow smile spread across Levi's face. "So I did, Miss Fairchild. So I did." They spent the next 3 days camped on the hillside, using branches and Levi's oilskin coat to fashion a crude shelter. The floodwaters receded inch by inch, revealing a transformed landscape. Where Levi's ranch had stood, only the stone chimney remained upright, a solitary marker of what had been. "I'm sorry about your home," Naomi said quietly as they stood looking down at the ruins on the 3rd morning. Levi's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "It's the land that matters. Buildings can be rebuilt. It will be a monumental task," she observed. "Yes," he agreed, then turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense. "Are you certain you want to be part of it?" The school in Shafter would be an easier life. Naomi considered his words, looking out over the mud-covered valley. In the 3 days they'd spent together, she'd come to respect Levi Ingram deeply. He worked tirelessly, never complained, and treated her with a quiet deference that acknowledged her capabilities without condescension. She'd also noticed other things: the way sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his dark brown hair, the surprising gentleness of his work-roughened hands, the deep laugh that came rarely but transformed his serious face when it did. "I've never chosen the easier path when the more meaningful one was available," she said finally. Something flickered in Levi's eyes: surprise, followed by what might have been admiration. "Then we have that in common, Miss Fairchild." As the waters continued to recede, they salvaged what they could from the ruins of the ranch. Miraculously, the root cellar had remained intact beneath the collapsed house, preserving stores of food that would sustain them in the difficult weeks ahead. A week after the flood crested, they rode into Shafter on 2 of Levi's horses that had survived the deluge. The town had fared better than the outlying ranches, situated as it was on slightly higher ground, though many buildings showed water damage to their lower levels. Their appearance at the general store caused a stir, partly because Levi was known and respected in the community, and partly because Naomi was still wearing his clothes, having no others. "Thought you might have been washed away, Ingram," said the storekeeper, Harold Jenkins, eyeing them curiously. "Nearly was," Levi replied, removing his hat. "Lost the house and most of the outbuildings. Cattle are mostly accounted for, though." Jenkins shook his head sympathetically. "Bad business all around. Cartwrights lost everything: house, barn, livestock. Old man Miller, too." His gaze shifted to Naomi. "And who might this be?" "Naomi Fairchild," she introduced herself, conscious of the whispers her appearance was generating among the other customers. "I was caught in the flood while traveling to Shafter. Mr. Ingram saved my life." "Miss Fairchild is the new school teacher," Levi added, placing a protective hand at the small of her back. "She'll be staying at my ranch while we rebuild." Jenkins' eyebrows shot up and the whispers intensified. "Is that so?" he said slowly. Well, welcome to Shafter, Miss Fairchild. Though there ain't much schooling happening at present, what with the flood and all. I understand, Naomi replied evenly. Mr. Ingram has kindly offered me employment until the school term begins. They purchased supplies including ready-made dresses for Naomi that the storekeeper's wife produced from the back room, and made arrangements to have lumber delivered to the ranch as soon as the roads were passable for wagons. As they prepared to leave, the town marshal, a weathered man named Garrison, approached them. Ingram, he nodded. Good to see you in one piece. His eyes flicked to Naomi. Madam, Marshal, Levi acknowledged. What can I do for you? The lawman lowered his voice. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The McAllister brothers rode through yesterday, asking after any new arrivals in town. He glanced at Naomi again, particularly interested in a dark-haired woman traveling alone. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Levi tensed. What did you tell them? He asked quietly. Said I hadn't seen anyone matching that description, Garrison replied. They didn't look like they were bringing good news, if you take my meaning. I appreciate the warning, Levi said, his hand finding Naomi's elbow. We'll be heading back now. Once they were mounted and clear of town, Levi guided their horses off the main trail into a small grove of trees. You want to tell me who the McAllister brothers are and why they're looking for you? He asked without preamble. Naomi stared straight ahead, her hands tight on the reins. I don't know anyone by that name. Naomi, Levi's voice softened. I'm trying to help you, but I can't do that if you're not honest with me. She closed her eyes briefly, then met his gaze. My husband's name was Robert Fairchild, she said quietly. He died 6 months ago in a factory accident in Boston. I have no connection to anyone named McAllister. Levi studied her face, his expression unreadable. But someone is looking for you. It wasn't a question, but Naomi nodded anyway. My late husband's business partner, Charles Wyndham. She hesitated. He made it clear after Robert's death that he expected me to marry him. When I refused, he became insistent. Insistent how? Levi asked, a dangerous edge to his voice. Naomi looked away. It doesn't matter. I left Boston, changed my route west several times. I thought I'd lost him. She took a deep breath. I'm sorry for bringing trouble to your door, Levi. I'll understand if you want me to move on. Levi was silent for a long moment, then reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. Not unless it's what you want. Tears pricked at Naomi's eyes. I don't want to leave, she admitted softly, but I don't want to put you in danger either. I can handle myself, Levi assured her, and I protect what's mine. He seemed to realize what he'd said and quickly amended. My ranch, my employees. It's a matter of principle. Something warm unfurled in Naomi's chest at his words, but she merely nodded. Thank you. They returned to the ranch site, where Levi had begun construction on a small cabin to serve as temporary shelter until a proper house could be built. The work was hard, but Naomi threw herself into it willingly, learning to saw boards, mix mortar, and even help raise wall sections under Levi's patient guidance. In the evenings, they would sit by the campfire, Rusty sprawled between them, and talk. Levi told her about his childhood in Missouri, his brief service in the Union Army, and his dreams for the ranch. Naomi spoke of her years teaching in Boston, her love of literature, and her desire to create a real school for the children of Shafter. Gradually, cautiously, they revealed more of themselves to each other. Levi admitted his loneliness during the long Colorado winters. Naomi confessed her relief at leaving behind the suffocating social expectations of Boston society. I never fit there, she said one evening, watching the flames dance. My mother was scandalized that I wanted to teach rather than simply wait for a suitable marriage. And was Robert Fairchild a suitable marriage? Levi asked, immediately regretting the question when pain flashed across Naomi's face. Robert was kind, she said after a moment. We had a mutual respect, if not a grand passion. He allowed me to continue teaching after we were married, which was unusual. She poked at the fire with a stick. His death was unexpected. We'd been married less than 2 years. I'm sorry, Levi said softly. Naomi nodded, then squared her shoulders. Enough about the past. Tell me more about your plans for the new house. As spring deepened into summer, the small cabin was completed, and work began on a larger, more permanent structure. Levi's surviving cattle grew fat on the lush grass that sprouted across the valley in the aftermath of the flood. Naomi took over the household duties, but also helped with the livestock, revealing an unexpected aptitude for animal husbandry that impressed Levi. "Where did you learn to deliver a calf?" he asked in amazement after she successfully assisted a heifer in birthing. Naomi laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "My grandfather had a small farm outside Boston. I spent summers there as a child." Her eyes twinkled. "I'm not entirely a city woman, Mr. Ingram." "So I see, Miss Fairchild," he replied, his gaze lingering on her face, flushed with exertion and achievement. The easy rhythm of their days was interrupted in late June when Marshal Garrison rode out to the ranch, his expression grave. "The McAllister brothers are back," he informed them without preamble. "They've been asking questions all over town, showing a photograph. Says they're representing a Mr. Wyndham from Boston who's looking for his fiancée." Naomi's face went white. "I was never engaged to Charles Wyndham," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "Never." "I believe you, madam," Garrison assured her, "but these fellows are persistent and armed." "So am I," Levi said quietly, his hand resting on the rifle leaning against the cabin wall. The marshal shook his head. "I don't want any shooting, Ingram. These men aren't outlaws, legally speaking. They're private investigators hired by a gentleman back east." "A gentleman who won't take no for an answer," Naomi said bitterly. Garrison sighed. "Look, I can stall them for a day, maybe 2. But they're offering good money for information, and someone in town will eventually point them this way." After the marshal left, Naomi paced the small cabin, her face tight with worry. "I should leave," she said. "Draw them away from here." "Absolutely not," Levi's voice was firm. "We'll face this together." "This isn't your fight, Levi." "It became my fight the moment you stepped onto my land," he said, moving to stand before her. "Naomi, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "You want to stay here, with me?" he asked, his voice gentle. "Yes," she whispered, unable to deny the truth any longer. "But then we'll make it happen," he interrupted. "I have an idea." 2 days later, the McAllister brothers, burly, weathered men with hard eyes, rode up to the half-built ranch house where Levi was working. "Afternoon," the older one called. "Name's James McAllister. This is my brother Edgar. We're looking for a woman named Naomi Fairchild." Levi drove one last nail before setting down his hammer and turning to face them. "What business do you have with Mrs. Ingram?" he asked calmly. The brothers exchanged confused looks. "Mrs. who?" Edgar demanded. "Ingram," Levi repeated. "My wife, Naomi Ingram." James dismounted, pulling a photograph from his coat pocket. "This woman," he insisted, showing Levi the image of Naomi, her hair formally arranged, wearing a high-necked dress typical of Boston society. Levi studied the photograph, then shrugged. "Looks a bit like my Naomi, I suppose, but my wife's been here in Colorado for nearly 2 years now." He gestured toward the ranch. "We lost our home in the flood last month, been rebuilding since. 2 years." Edgar repeated suspiciously. "You're sure about that?" "Well, I ought to be," Levi drawled, "considering we'll be celebrating our second anniversary come August." He turned as Naomi emerged from the cabin, carrying a tray with a pitcher and glasses. "Isn't that right, darling?" Naomi, wearing a simple calico dress with her hair braided and pinned up, approached with a serene smile. "What's right, dear?" she asked, setting down the tray. "I was just telling these gentlemen that we've been married nearly 2 years," Levi said, casually placing an arm around her waist. "August 15th, she confirmed, leaning into him with practiced ease. "Though sometimes it feels like we've been together much longer." She offered the brothers a polite smile. "Would you care for some lemonade? It's dreadfully hot today." James McAllister frowned, looking from the photograph to Naomi and back again. "You're sure you've never been to Boston, madam?" "Boston?" Naomi laughed lightly. "Goodness, no, I was born in St. Louis and came west with my father when I was 16. I met Levi in Denver." She looked up at him with convincing adoration. "Love at first sight, wasn't it, dear?" "For me it was," Levi agreed, his arm tightening slightly around her waist. The brothers stayed for nearly an hour, asking probing questions that Levi and Naomi fielded with the ease of a couple who had carefully rehearsed their story. Finally, seemingly convinced, they mounted their horses to leave. "Sorry to have troubled you folks," James said, tipping his hat. "Enjoy the rest of your day." "I hope you find the woman you're looking for," Naomi called after them. Only when the men were dots on the horizon did Levi and Naomi relax their embrace. "You think they believed us?" she asked anxiously. "I think so," Levi replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "We should be careful for a while, just in case." That night, as they sat on the porch of the cabin watching fireflies rise from the tall grass, Naomi turned to Levi. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." Levi looked at her, his face partially shadowed in the gathering dusk. "I told you before, I protect what's mine." "Is that what I am?" Naomi asked softly. "Yours?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Slowly, Levi reached out to touch her cheek. "I'd like you to be," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "But only if that's what you want too." Naomi covered his hand with her own, turning her face to press a kiss against his palm. "I think I've been yours since you pulled me from the flood," she whispered. Levi's kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. When Naomi responded, wrapping her arms around his neck and drawing him closer, the kiss deepened, becoming an answer, a promise. They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Shafter. The ceremony took place on the hill where they had taken refuge during the flood, with only Rusty, a few neighbors, and Levi's cattle as witnesses. Naomi wore a simple white dress purchased from the general store, with wildflowers in her hair. Levi had a new shirt and had actually polished his boots for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the small gathering cheered, and Levi kissed his bride with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. "Mrs. Ingram," he murmured against her lips, "for real this time." "For real," she agreed, smiling up at him. "And forever." The new ranch house was completed by early September, larger and sturdier than its predecessor, with a proper stone foundation to withstand future floods. Naomi began teaching at the small schoolhouse in Shafter, riding in 3 days a week while Levi focused on rebuilding his herd and preparing for winter. In the evenings, they would sit on their new porch, watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in impossible colors, Rusty dozing at their feet. "Are you happy?" Levi asked one such evening, his arm around Naomi's shoulders. "Completely," she answered without hesitation, nestling closer to him. "Are you?" Levi was quiet for a moment, contemplating the vista before them, the lush valley, the distant mountains, the life they were building together. "I never thought I'd have this," he admitted. "A home that's more than just a place to sleep, someone to share it with." "Well, you're stuck with me now," Naomi teased, but her eyes were serious as they met his. "I love you, Levi Ingram." "And I love you, Naomi Ingram," he replied, kissing her forehead. "More than I knew was possible." Winter came early that year, blanketing the ranch in snow by mid-October. Naomi delighted in the transformation of the landscape, while Levi watched her childlike wonder with amusement. "Didn't you have snow in Boston?" he asked as she caught snowflakes on her tongue one morning. "Of course," she replied. "But city snow turns gray and slushy almost immediately. This." She gestured at the pristine white expanse surrounding them. "This is magical." The cold months passed in cozy contentment. Levi taught Naomi to shoot and ride properly. She introduced him to the pleasures of classic literature, reading aloud by lamplight on long winter evenings. They learned each other's bodies and hearts, building a foundation of trust and passion that deepened with each passing day in March. As the first signs of spring began to emerge from beneath the melting snow, Naomi shared news that brought tears of joy to Levi's eyes. "A baby," he repeated in wonder, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Due in September," she confirmed, covering his hand with her own. "Just after our first true anniversary." Levi gathered her in his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. "I never thought—" He began, then stopped, unable to continue. "I know," Naomi whispered, understanding without words. "I never thought I would find this either, this kind of love, this happiness." Their son, Samuel, was born on a cool September evening as the aspens in the foothills turned golden. He had Levi's blue eyes and Naomi's determined chin, a perfect blend of them both. "He's beautiful," Levi murmured, cradling his son with careful hands. "Perfect. He is," Naomi agreed, exhausted but radiant. "Our little miracle." As Samuel grew, so did the ranch. Levi's careful management and hard work paid off, allowing them to expand their operations and hire help. Naomi continued teaching, bringing Samuel with her when he was old enough, taking pride in the growing number of students who filled the schoolhouse. The threat from Boston never materialized again. Whether Charles Wyndham had given up his pursuit or the McAllister brothers had truly believed their story, they never knew. Occasionally, Naomi would receive a letter from her few remaining friends in Boston, but the past gradually lost its power to disturb her present happiness. 5 years after the flood that had brought them together, Levi and Naomi stood on the hill overlooking their ranch, now a thriving operation with a large house, sturdy barn, and grazing cattle dotting the verdant valley. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it," Naomi said, watching 4-year-old Samuel chase butterflies in the wildflowers, his little sister Eleanor toddling after him on chubby legs. "How different my life might have been if I hadn't gotten lost in that storm. If I hadn't been standing on that porch at just the right moment," Levi added, his arm around her waist. "You ever regret it?" she asked. Taking in a bedraggled stranger who brought nothing but trouble, Levi turned to face her, his expression serious. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "You brought life to this ranch, Naomi, to me." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him, still marveling at how this tall, quiet man had become the center of her world. "And you gave me a home," she whispered against his lips. "A real home. Ma, Pa, look." Samuel's excited voice interrupted them. The boy was pointing at the Purgat-War River, which flowed peacefully through their property, tamed now by newly constructed levees. Fish jumping. Hand in hand, Levi and Naomi walked down the hill to join their children, Rusty now gray-muzzled but still spry trotting ahead of them. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land that had witnessed their unlikely beginning and continued to nurture their growing love. "You know," Levi said thoughtfully, watching Samuel demonstrate his fishing technique to little Alina, "I've been thinking we might build a small boat. Nothing fancy, just something for fishing and maybe the occasional picnic on the river." Naomi laughed, squeezing his hand. "As long as it's not an ark, I'm in favor," she teased. "No more arks," Levi promised, gathering her close. "Just smooth sailing from here on out." And though they both knew life would bring its share of storms, they faced the future together. Their love a shelter stronger than any they could build with mere wood and nails, a refuge that had withstood flood and drought, fear and uncertainty, to emerge unshaken and enduring. In the years that followed, the story of how Levi Ingram had built an ark for two during the Great Flood of '72 became something of a legend in Shafter. Embellished with each telling, it transformed into a tale of courage and romance that parents told their children on stormy nights. But for Levi and Naomi, the true story was written in their daily lives, in the home they continued to build together, in the children they raised with love and laughter, in the quiet moments when their eyes met across a room and still sparked with the recognition of souls that had found their match against all odds. And on the 10th anniversary of the flood, Levi surprised Naomi by taking her to the spot where they had first beached their makeshift ark. There, nestled among the cottonwoods, he had built a small pavilion overlooking the river. "Our own private reminder," he explained as she explored the simple structure, "of how sometimes destruction can lead to creation, how losing everything can actually mean finding what matters most." Naomi, her eyes bright with tears, wrapped her arms around the man who had become her world. "I love you, Levi Ingram," she whispered, "through flood and drought, through all the seasons of our lives." "And I love you, Naomi Ingram," he replied, his voice rough with emotion, "forever and always." As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms with the river flowing peacefully below, both remembered that desperate night when they had worked side by side to build a vessel that would carry them to safety. Neither could have imagined then that the true ark they were building would be their life together, a sanctuary of love strong enough to weather any storm, carrying them forward into a future bright with promise and possibility.